This is the voice of the Alex 7000 master computer, granting you access to the OSI files.
A vengeful spirit has a surprise for Jamie Summers.
It is after you.
What is?
Ghosts! How do you stop an enemy you can't even see? The Bionic Woman.
Watch Wednesday night at 8 here on ABC.
Welcome back, everyone, to an all-new episode of the OSI Files. It's the director of the OSI Files here, John S. Drew, and today we're delving into a mission that Jamie Summers was sent on early in her career, codename The Ghosthunter. The episode aired on May 26th, 1976. It was the final episode of the first season of The Bionic Woman. Jamie is sent to act as a governess for the daughter of an OSI scientist while also ensuring that his work on a sensor project continues in safety. But there's a wrinkle in that a ghost appears to be haunting the scientist's home. The episode featured Paul Shinar as Dr. Alan Corey, Christy Nichols as his daughter Amanda, and Bo Brundon as the mysterious Emil Laszlo. It was written by Kenneth Johnson and Justin Edgerton and directed by Kenneth Johnson. I have two new guests joining me today to discuss the episode, as well as my special guest, the man behind the Ghosthunter himself, creator of The Bionic Woman, Mr. Kenny Johnson. But before we get into that, let's take a look back at May 26th, 1976.
Accessing OSI Historical Databank.
On this day, the top story dealt with West Point cadets who were accused of cheating or who were critical of the United States Military Academy's honor code as they were compiling lists of hundreds of their classmates who they said were also involved in the cheating scandal. Their apparent intention was to confront the Academy with a difficult choice: prosecution of all whom they suspected, leading to widespread expulsions, or general acquittal and re-examination of the code. In the end, the Academy did have to admit there was a level of cheating, leading to the guilty verdict of 151 cadets for violating the honor code in taking their exams. In other news, Defense Department officials in Washington disclosed that Secretary Donald Rumsfeld interceded on behalf of the Lockheed Aircraft Corporation in an attempt to overcome Japanese reluctance to purchase $250 million worth of patrol aircraft directly from the company. The sale had been jeopardized by disclosure of the company's payment of bribes and commissions in Japan. Mr. Rumsfeld proposed an arrangement under which his department would become the contracting agent. Wasn't that nice of him? And in England, the British government put on its biggest show of the year to celebrate the loss of the 13 colonies that became the United States 200 years previously. In Westminster Hall, a congressional delegation received a reproduction of the Magna Carta to symbolize a common heritage. The British were getting mileage out of our country's bicentennial.
Welcome back. Your dreams were your ticket out.
The number one song at the time was the theme to Welcome Back, Kotter by John Sebastian. On television that night, NBC was showing a repeat airing of Little House on the Prairie. Centennial guest starred Theodore Bickel in a story involving the kids coming together to help Walnut Grove with its huge debt. CBS was airing Stranded, a pilot episode for a TV series that never happened. Kevin Dobson, Laura Parker, and Marie Windsor star in the story of a group of survivors of a plane crash struggling to get along on an island. Wait a minute. That sounds very familiar. Like I've seen something like that recently. Didn't Gilligan's Island do something like that? Yeah, no wonder. It'll never work. And that's your look back at May 26th, 1976.
Accessing OSI Mission Briefing.
I'm pleased that for the second episode of this podcast, I have not only two fans of the Bionic Woman, but two good people who have been supportive of me and my endeavors in the past. Herbie J. Pilato is no stranger to Bionic fandom, being the author of the Bionic book, The $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman Reconstructed. Herbie, though, is not only an expert on the Bionic series, but on television in general, with a number of works on television to his credit. His most recent work is Glamour, Gidget, and the Girl Next Door, a work focusing on the women of television from the 50s through the 80s. Joel Eisenberg is a writer and producer whose work, The Chronicles of Ara, takes us on the journey of J.R.R. Tolkien's discovery of a lost book of Beowulf containing a code that could warn of humanity's end. Joel is fascinated with the mechanics of art, a theme we see in his work, and something I'm looking forward to talking to him about in this discussion. And as I say, I am thrilled to have with me two people who I've not only known now for some time, but have also been very supportive of my work. First, let me introduce to you all. It is my pleasure to say this because I've wanted to have him on a podcast for some time. Mr. Herbie J. Pilato. Herbie, say hello to everybody here.
Hello, everybody. so excited to be here, truly. I'm sorry it took so long as well. So.
That's okay. That's okay. It's worth the wait. And Mr. Joel Eisenberg. Joel, hello.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Now, gentlemen, I want to get into something really quick here first before we get into the episode itself in general, or specifically, I should say. The Bionic Woman. When it came to this series, I know as a kid, I came into the whole Bionic fandom. Yes, I saw $6 Million Man first, but I actually saw the Bionic Woman. It kind of cemented my love for both series. And I've got to say, for the longest time, if you had like a race between the two, Bionic Woman would always come out a little bit ahead. Where did you stand in terms of both series?
Well, it's hard because first I watched the $6 Million Man from the minute that it came on as the movie, and then it was the monthly series and then the weekly. So I have to say that I really became involved with it in the weekly version, and it just happened chronologically for me with the Bionic Woman, because I actually was there. I grew up with it literally at that time.
And how about you, Joel?
That's a great question. I would have to say, to be completely honest, the $6 Million Man, I was a fan of Martin Caidin's books, Cyborg and so on. And when the $6 Million Man premiered, I was just riveted. An interesting story is that when the Bionic Woman premiered, I believe it was, correct me if I'm wrong, January 14th, 1976. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
Okay. January 14th is my birthday. And I remember very clearly my Uncle Davey, who has since passed on, called me up to, like he did every year, and I always look forward to it every year. And, he picks up the phone, and I didn't want to speak to him because the Bionic Woman was premiering that night. So I got him off really quick, and to this day I get Jewish guilt over that.
Oh. See, yeah, I came into the series around Bigfoot and maybe just a little before it. So, of course, then Bionic Woman was also premiering at that time. And just for some reason, that show, even though, yes, I love $6 Million Man, I've had the pleasure of meeting both Lee and Lindsay now, just Bionic Woman always seemed to come out just a nose hair ahead if this were a horse race.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, the episode itself, The Ghosthunter, we've watched it numerous times. We saw it in its original airing back on May 26, 1976. As an episode, what still stands out to you to this day?
Here's what was very interesting to me. I'm a huge fan of 1970s horror films. So when I watched The Ghosthunter, I'm thinking Carrie and I'm thinking of The Exorcist. And Herbie and I had a conversation about doing some, cross-pollination of, well, it's a science fiction show, does horror really belong and all this, but we had the same conclusion by the end of the episode, and I'll let Herbie speak on that. But to me, I was really shocked at how well done it was. There wasn't a false note, I think, in the premise. I love the fact that Christy McNichol, a young Christy McNichol, was discovered to have had telekinesis, and I love the reasoning behind that. I thought it fit in just tremendously well with the rest of the series. It was a nice surprise. It was very well shot. And then, of course, you have the conceit with the Alpha Sensor Project and all of that. So to me, it really worked. And it was, honestly, I revisited it again just the other day, and I was stunned by how well it holds up.
I would agree with all of that, adding that one of my big things is that I don't like when a science fiction show crosses over into fantasy or supernatural aspects, or I don't like it when a fantasy show or a supernatural show crosses over to science fiction. And The Bionic Woman did it so well, though. I mean, to me, Bewitched, one of the worst episodes is Bewitched, and there is only one worst episode, and that is Samantha's Secret Saucer, is where Aunt Clara brings to life some aliens from one of Tabitha's saucers. So that bothered me because it was science fiction. But on this episode, like Joel says, it was done so well. And of course, John and Joel, you know that I'm going to connect this all to Bewitched somehow anyway, because I connect everything to Bewitched. But even when I watched the show originally, before I wrote my Bewitched books, I always felt that there was a similarity between Jamie Summers and Samantha, Elizabeth Montgomery style in portraying Samantha, and Lindsay Wagner style in portraying Jamie. Even when they would kiss the characters, their eyes, would open up wide. Very, very similar. So now, years and years later, when I watched this show recently again, or this episode, and after I had studied not only Bewitched but Elizabeth Montgomery's life, I saw the similarities, odd similarities, so much between this episode of The Bionic Woman and Bewitched in general. Number one, obviously, they make several references to witches. And beyond what I just said, too, about Jamie or Elizabeth Montgomery and Lindsay Wagner's similar acting styles regarding their eyes and whatnot. So they make several references to witches. There is the name Rebecca and Elizabeth are actually used in the episodes. Elizabeth from Elizabeth Montgomery, obviously, and Rebecca was the name of Elizabeth's grandmother, and it's the name of her daughter. I just found it all very, very strange. But what made me just love this episode so much is that even though it was a science fiction supernatural tie-in, it really kind of wasn't, because they brought it, as Joel said, or alluded to, a logical scientific closure at the end in general reasoning. So, I mean, just overall, it's so beautifully done. And I love, too, towards the end where Jamie is running, and one of the great things about Lindsay's interpretation of that character is that she always retained her femininity. And when Jamie's running through, the obstacles that are coming up against her through the telekinesis there, she doesn't, fist up her arm to block or anything. She keeps it very flexible and light or whatever, and she deflects the board and all of the obstacles that are coming towards her without fisting up. Not to sound stereotypical, but you know what I'm saying, that femininity still remained throughout the entire series and even in those traumatic moments.
Can I add to that a little bit?
Sure.
What I found interesting was this, and I was keying in on Lindsay's performance, and I've always been a fan. And when you asked the first question, John, again, with me, it's always been the $6 Million Man by a hair. And I was a member of the $6 Million Man Bionic Action Club and all of that, and had movie viewers and the whole deal. But Lindsay Wagner's performance, again, just tremendously hit home for me. When I was watching, when she died in the $6 Million Man, and they brought her back, and then the series started and all this, I'm thinking to myself as I'm watching this episode, Christy McNichol was part of Family. And I remember when Lindsay Wagner basically shocked the entire television industry by winning the Emmy that year against Sada Thompson, who everybody thought was going to win from that same show, Family. And one of the reasons why is because Herbie mentions femininity. I'm looking at Lindsay Wagner, and she was able to just really develop a natural chemistry with anybody she was on camera with.
Yes.
And I think as an actress, she is tremendously, tremendously underrated. And that's just my quick 2 cents, because her performance really struck me in this as well.
I totally, absolutely agree with that. I mean, she was just a born natural. Both Lindsay and Christy did things instinctively as actors that actors train and train and train and train and train for and never achieve. And certainly Christy did that from the womb, and Lindsay did that as well.
Just touching on what you were saying, Herbie, about how, a science fiction show dealing with supernatural or horror elements and such, and how in the end Kenny pulls it off. But Kenny does that very often. He takes these premises that we would assume it's going to be straightforward, and he always spins it on its ear, whether it's the entire series itself, in the case of, like, say, The Incredible Hulk or Alien Nation or V, or then in individual episodes like this, it's like you're thinking you're going to get a horror show. You think, because everything is so moody, the music sets the pace, and the lighting and the camera work and such, but then it's like, no, this is really what it's all about. That's Kenny's style.
Yeah, well, he was so idiosyncratic. You know, I mean, this is a guy that, and you had mentioned, you know, The Incredible Hulk and so on and so on, and his shows were different. You didn't know what to expect. There was never really any predictability with whatever he did. Kudos to Ken Johnson. I just thought he did an incredible... Let me backtrack a minute. There are reasons why there are producers whose work lasts. And there are reasons why you have producers whose work lasts with the public. And you can name people like Aaron Spelling and Stephen Cannell and Ken Johnson and on. And his work was very, like I said, idiosyncratic. I could watch something on television and say, that's Ken Johnson. That's how much he stood out, for me anyway.
Well, there's just so much heart and soul in everything he does. And I remember him telling me one story for the BIONIC book, or at least while we were doing the interview, about how he was on a train ride at some point, and as he was traveling on this train, he looked around at all the homes and thousands of homes that he was passing on this train, and, you know, all he could think of was, oh my gosh, the humanity. You know, he was thinking about actually what was going on in each of those homes, in the families of those homes that, you know, they lived. So it was just an amazing perception, and just proving right there his heart and soul, that he really gives to everything he does.
Well, heart and soul. Look at the end of every episode of The Incredible Hulk when Bill Bixby had the backpack on his back, walked off into the distance.
Yes, and by the way, and again, that The Incredible Hulk happened to be one of Elizabeth Montgomery's favorite TV shows.
Really?
Really?
Yep.
Wow. And tying in with the witchcraft also, I also just love the fact that he's using clear references to the real Salem trials, the whole Putnam family. There's a mention of Giles Corey, I believe, at one point. And just the whole thing with the Crucible and Arthur Miller's play, which is one of my favorite plays. And it thrilled me a few years back to see someone on Facebook posting a picture of Lee Majors in his first role as John Proctor in the Crucible. So to me, it was like, wow.
Yes, and it's interesting, too, that, of course, there were shades of The Exorcist. The bed was shaking there at one point in the episode. And there's also, it's like a prelude to the film Poltergeist, because they really introduced that term, I think, to the mainstream media, you know, about at least 10 years or so, or less than that, before the actual movie Poltergeist. So there you go.
By the way, I know Kenny mentions it in the commentary, and I forgot to ask him when I had the chance. There is the house, and he talks about the house in the commentary, but there's also an opening shot of the town, and for a split second, it looked almost like the same setting for the first Back to the Future movie, because there's the clock tower and the road and all. That wasn't the same one, though, was it?
That's a good question.
Now I'm going to have to do a little split screening here with two different DVD players and such, and see if it is this. It just looks it, but very well could be just someplace else. But it's a beautiful, it's so quick too. It's an establishing shot of the town and the clock tower again, all adding to the feel that it's Salem, even though it's got to be in California somewhere.
I think we got to get Kenny on the phone. What do you think, Herbie?
I think I need a follow-up with him here. And also, I got to point out the whole thing with Christy McNichol's character, Amanda. Yes, she was fantastic, the portrayal. And what I love is the first scene she has with Lindsay is when Lindsay's, you know, arriving at the house and such. And her character, Amanda, says how her father is too engrossed. Even Lindsay does this beautiful double take, as she says engrossed, like, oh my gosh, what kind of kid is this? She's different. She's not your normal child.
Yeah, and that's just a testament to Lindsay's great expressive talents as an actress. And also, she became afraid, very fearful, just like any human being would, which also allows her to be identified with the audience, for the audience to identify with her fears. She's not the superhero who is fearless. No, she has fears. She gets afraid, and that adds to her humanity and adds to her accessibility to the audience, I think.
let me jump on that. And Herbie, I'm going to use your words again. I'm going to use heart and soul. I think in a roundabout way, this particular script for this particular episode was not, I mean, the whole superhero element was out of it for me. And I really thought it was, I don't want to use the word excuse in a negative term. I'm actually saying it positively. But it was a way to get Jamie Summers, I think, into sort of a motherly kind of role in this. I thought it was basically almost like a mother and daughter story. And Jamie was kind of the surrogate. And looking at this and watching it again, everything between Christy McNichol's performance, Lindsay's, but the writing. I mean, we have to really pay attention to that writing also. It is just loaded with humanity. And I think it's one of the reasons why this episode stands out.
Yes. And I have to say that when I was a kid, it was one of my least favorite episodes of The Bionic Woman. And now...
Herbie, I don't believe you were ever a kid.
I still am, actually, of course. But now it's one of my favorites. It's just so beautifully done.
Isn't it funny, though, how that is the case, that there are many episodes of TV shows? I wouldn't say TV shows themselves, because there's plenty of TV shows that you look at, you scratch your head, and you're wondering, you know, and I always bring this up, Chips. I'm sorry, I tried watching Chips. I don't see what I saw in it as a kid. But I know I was a huge Chips fan as a kid, but it just doesn't hold up now. But here, when it comes to The Bionic Woman or The $6 Million Man, there are episodes we loved to pieces as a child, and maybe they don't hold up as well under our scrutiny as an adult, but then there are other ones that as a child we turned away from, and yet now we can really appreciate. There's certain episodes from the first and second season of $6 Million Man as a kid I found, you know, mind-numbingly boring, but now I see the drama, I see the character interaction, I see Lee really shining in those early episodes, and I'm like, wow, this is some good stuff. And I would say the same thing. I don't remember as a kid liking this episode as much as I do now.
Right. Well, just like the episode of $6 Million Man, which is escapes me, and I know you guys are going to know it, with William Shatner. That was my least favorite $6 Million Man episode, and it's now one of my favorites. I believe it was written by D.C. Fontana, correct?
Correct. Burning Bright.
Burning Bright. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of my favorite episodes of the $6 Million Man. It used to be one of the least favorite episodes. So there you go.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting too, John, what you say, because you know, George Lucas, when he did the prequels to Star Wars, Phantom Menace got terrible response generally from the fans, and yet it made a ton of money. And Lucas said, well, you're not looking at these films with your 13-year-old eyes anymore. You know, now some of you are parents and grandparents, and that's why you're not maybe enjoying it as much. But ask your kids how they enjoy it. Well, it's sort of that, because I could watch almost any episode of The $6 Million Man and The Bionic Woman today and enjoy it for what it is. And for me, it brings me back. I was such a huge fan back in the day. And if I sat down right now with all the DVDs, you know, starting from the first season of both, I wouldn't be able to stop. It'd be binge watching. It'd be like watching Breaking Bad or something on Netflix over a period of 3 days. That, to me, they still hold up.
They do hold up. I want to ask you both a question about another character here in the episode also. We haven't brought him up yet. That of Laszlo, our paranormal specialist there. I loved this character because, again, he added that element of maybe there is something to this, that there is something about ghosts because we've got this guy. I mean, yeah, he seems kind of kooky at times, but he's there on the spot every time something. And then maybe you wonder if maybe he's the one manipulating or bringing the supernatural element in, because he always seems to be around as the episode is progressing.
See, it's funny, John, I disagree with you on that. I thought he was just sort of stock. And with the accent, I thought that it was the intention of the writers and so on to have us think that he is somehow responsible. I didn't really grasp that character. I don't know, Herbie, did you, or...
I think it was a little over the top. It was the least realistic character of them all. But that's okay. By the way, he makes it in the end, right? It's not really clear to me, but he does make it, right?
They say he's going. I think if I remember correctly, they did say he was going to recover. I mean, he's in the hospital, and then Jamie has to leave to head back to rescue Amanda from her subconscious. And I can see that. I totally could see that you'd look at him as over the top. I mean, even Kenny points out, and actually now in watching it again in the commentary, Kenny points out there's that dramatic scene with the shaking tea tray or glass tray and such. And Lindsay and Bo Brundon, they can't keep a straight face even because it's so over the top. You can see the corners of their mouth as they struggled not to smile. And Kenny was talking about how they had to do many takes for that scene because they couldn't stop laughing.
That's funny.
So I can understand it. And yet at the same time, and I never told Kenny this, and maybe I should have the last time I spoke to him, but I actually based almost an entire audio drama series around that character. I mean, I didn't take the character himself by name, but what happened was I'd gotten the idea. I'd started watching Dark Shadows, and I must have seen that episode as well, the Bionic Woman episode, The Ghosthunter. And suddenly I came up with the idea of The House at Morning Heights Drive, about a young woman who returns home, and she's warned by a similar character like Laszlo, and which I actually did the voice, and he came off sounding more like Bela Lugosi, though, warning her to beware and such. And I tried to put the Kenny twist on it, that it wasn't she was being haunted by a spirit and such, but that she actually had a twin sister she never knew about who was totally deranged. So,
very cool.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun. It was something we did about 20 years ago, some friends and I, and we did about maybe 5 or 6 episodes of it. But it was just, and now in thinking about it, it's amazing how many of elements of Kenny's shows I've worked in some way into some of my other writings and such.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Well, let me ask you this now, gentlemen, because we're starting to run out of time here. Okay, we liked the episode. As a kid, wasn't one of your favorites, Herbie, but now let's put it this way. You've got a friend who's like, I've heard about the Bionic Woman. I heard Lindsay Wagner is a great actress in it. I love her in other things I've seen her in. And you say, like they say to you, what should I watch? What's a good episode to start with? Or they're there with you and you're like, let me pull out the DVD player and such. Would you show this as one of the first episodes to give them a feel for the Bionic Woman?
Yes, but I would suggest the other episodes first. First of all, I love the entire first season. I love the whole fact that there's even shades of ISIS there a little bit, the superhero, whereas Lindsay Jamie is in a teacher in the classroom. I love all that. Even when she wore the glasses with her hair back in a ponytail, she could have easily done a spin and turned into the Bionic Woman. So I love those, all the first season ones, but I would not recommend this one as the first, no, because then everybody would think it's a supernatural show. I think, in general, I would suggest the other episodes first.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm with you 100% there, and for the same reasons. I would show it, but not one of the top or first 5 or 6 or. Maybe among the last, but it was not a reflection of the episode, but just to give somebody what the show is building about.
Yeah, I think I would be in full agreement with you, gentlemen, because she's Jamie, and all the elements that we love about Jamie are there, but you're not really getting a feel for the series. This is something different compared to what we would see overall. And even Kenny has admitted that he wanted to do something different, but it's not a best representative first episode to show. It's a good episode to show in general after a while, going, oh, if you like this, then watch this one as well.
Right. I mean, I'm convinced on a historical basis this was actually really pioneering in one other sense that's very rarely discussed. And when that character appeared on the $6 Million Man for the first time, and then she died at the end, I mean, everybody fell in love with her. All of America fell in love with Jamie Summers. It's like, who is this person? Who is Lindsay Wagner? Who's Jamie? Oh my God! And when she died, and Steve's in the phone booth, and the rain is pouring down, and all that stuff, it's like I think it was one of the few times in television history, outside of maybe the 3rd season of the original Star Trek, where just fan demand and letter writing and everything else demanded that this character come back for a show of her own. And I think when you're introducing somebody to the series, you really want to show that person why early on.
Right, and it wasn't as though they demanded the character came back. They demanded that Lindsay came back as that character. because there were suggestions because she was out of contract with Universal. We all know the story, and there were names like, okay, well, bring in Sally Field. No, get me Lindsay Wagner. Well, let's go with Farrah Fawcett. No, get me Lindsay Wagner. How about Stephanie Powers? No, get me Lindsay Wagner. People loved Lindsay. They loved that natural beauty that she brought to the character, to the role. They loved her personality, the multi-dimensions, the first multi-dimensional superhero female character ever presented on television. She made it so real. That's who we love. Yes, it was great that Jamie Summers was a good person too, but Jamie Summers was Jamie Summers because of Lindsay Wagner.
And I think that is a good note to end this on. Gentlemen, before we go, though, just want to give you a moment. Herbie, how can people follow you and what you're doing and your latest works and such, and these series of talks you're doing out there in California, Throwback Thursdays?
Yes, I'm very excited about those, as they're a co-presentation of Barnes & Noble and the Classic TV Preservation Society, my nonprofit organization. We do weekly live events with actors and writers and celebrities and directors from mostly the classic TV world. Upcoming shows include appearances by Anson Williams from Happy Days and Gloria Loring and Kathy Garver and Dawn Wells from Gilligan's Island. For more information about that, you can like me on Facebook or go to the Classic TV Preservation Society page and the Classic TV Preservation Society group, both on Facebook. Or you can email me at classictvps@gmail.com. So there you go.
Okay, and Joel, how about you?
I appreciate that question. I'll answer it, but right before, I got to give a shout-out to the Classic Television Preservation Society and to Herbie and to Throwback Thursday. My wife and I go to Throwback Thursday events every Thursday. I think I've missed one since they've started. And I was actually a guest at one of his first at Barnes & Noble. There is nothing like it. If you live in Southern California and you can get to Burbank on a Thursday night and you're a fan of classic television, honestly, I mean, me, Mr. ADD, every Thursday, if I'm not there, I lose my mind if I miss one. So last week, I almost lost my mind. It was the first one I missed since you started, Herbie. But that was a quick plug, and I mean every word of that. You really need to go. All right.
Wow. Thank you very much for that, Joel.
You can pay me later. All right, so the didn't even react, Herbie. Okay, no, but my new novel series is The Chronicles of Aura, and that's available in a bookstore or Barnes & Noble or Amazon and so on. And this is the first of a series of 8 fantasy novels, and the second one actually comes out next month, where I start my book tour for that one. And you can get me on the websites eisenbergandhillard.com or thechroniclesofaura.com. And if anybody wants to shoot an email, chroniclesofaura@yahoo.com. So it's chroniclesofaura@yahoo.com is the best way to reach me. And John, thank you so much for this. This was a blast.
Thank you very much, both of you. And I'll definitely put links up as well when this episode goes up. I'll put links in the show notes so that people can also connect there through that way as well.
John, I wanted to say one other thing. You are an amazing guy. You do so much for the classic TV community, certainly for Bionics. Your enthusiasm is just astounding. And thank you for the great light that you bring to the classic TV world and to the entertainment industry in general.
Well, thank you, Herbie. I appreciate that. And I just hope that, to me, it's just a matter of sharing. And that's what I want to do, is I want to share my love. As a friend of mine put it, he said, the great thing about podcasts is that, normally it would just be me and him and maybe a couple of other people sitting around a room, whereas now I can just share it with the world. And if they want to listen, then so be it.
John, in the spirit of sharing, as you know, I have a very large social network. So always feel free to post, not only this show, but to post anything else you do on, my pages. So you don't have to ask. Just go for it.
Thank you very much, Joel. I appreciate that. Gentlemen, once again, thank you very much for being here. And folks, I'm going to take a quick break. And when I return, I will be joined by Mr. Kenny Johnson.
The Bionic Woman will continue in a moment.
Beretta in 30 minutes from now on ABC.
Hey, Reggie Jackson, you got a mean swing, but how's your love life? Let's talk about my home run. Well, Reggie. My slugging. Reggie. My RBI. Let's talk about your love life. Nothing to talk about.
Hey, Reggie. Maybe you need Ultra Bright with more whitener than any leading toothpaste.
And a mean, clean taste that makes my mouth feel alive. Now, when they ask you, how's your love life? Tell them what Ultra Bright did for Reggie.
This is Oscar Goldman speaking.
Hi, John. This is Mike Anthony. I just really enjoy the OSI file, and I just wanted to make a comment on Ghosthunter. I think it's a great season finale. I think the lighting is very cinematic, and I just love the whole mood of the show. And I think it's also kind of interesting that Jamie got so involved with Dr. Corey. Considering he had a daughter, we don't see Jamie do that again. I guess maybe she learned that was not a good idea to get so involved with somebody when she's undercover. I thought that was an interesting aspect of the show. And thanks again. Bye.
Accessing OSI Special Operative Files.
I've been fortunate to know Kenny Johnson for nearly 25 years. Although we've never met face to face, he's always been willing to help this crazy fool with the various projects I've been engaged in over the years. Kenny appeared on my public access show, The Chronic Rift, back in 1992 to talk about his various television productions. He's always been willing to answer any crazy question I would put to him in regards to his productions. And like Herbie and Joel, I thank him for agreeing to appear on the podcast. This one went a little longer than I told him it would, but we were having such a good time I couldn't stop, and I think neither could he. Kenny Johnson, welcome to the OSI Files.
Thank you very much. My pleasure to be here. I'm delighted, always delighted to talk to my friends.
And I thank you for that, because years ago you appeared on my public access show by phone, The Chronic Rift. And one of the things that we did was we discussed not only just the Bionic Woman and the $6 Million Man, but we talked about V and the Incredible Hulk. And we pointed out, and at that time you were, I don't know if you were being just nice or if it genuinely did surprise you at the time, when one of my guests pointed out how all your shows had something to do with somebody keeping a secret in some way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's
here,
interesting, right?
Yeah, and now here we're dealing with the Ghosthunter, where it's not that they're keeping a secret, but it's actually a secret revealed, or like a surprise and such. And something I have noticed in many of your works is that you do, in some ways, pay homages to other things that influence you or that has an effect on you, like for instance the Alex 7000 being an homage to HAL from 2001 and such. And now here we are with the Ghosthunter, and I'm curious, like, what were the origins of wanting to do a story like this? Because it's not just a simple matter of here's a ghost story, it's a ghost story with a twist.
Well, yeah, that was always the kind of the fun aspect of doing it. Was my friend Lefty and I had worked together on a number of scripts, that some of which got produced and some of which never did. The Price of Liberty episode of the $6 Million Man, about somebody putting a bomb under the Liberty Bell and sort of holding it hostage for lots of money, had originated with Lefty as a screenplay. And when I landed on the $6 Million Man, I said, hey, that's a good story. Let's turn it into an episode. And with the Ghosthunter, I think Lefty and I had been talking about doing some sort of a movie script about someone who had these telekinetic capabilities, like Walter Pidgeon did in Forbidden Planet, the great movie from the 1950s, sci-fi movie, where he had these abilities that were coming out of his mind, but they were coming out of his subconscious mind, which to me was a very intriguing premise. And we got to posit, kicking around the idea of, well, what if a kid had that and didn't know it? Gave us an opportunity to do what appeared to be a ghost story, but which was in truth all coming out of this little girl's head in a albeit sort of psychic telekinetic kind of way. And it was a different way to approach the idea of telekinesis and the idea of being able to move things with your mind, and in this case have those things being moved, being driven by an emotional core that had to do with jealousy about her father's work and that sort of thing. It was kind of interesting and intricate, and it did sort of develop that way. And when I was on The Bionic Woman, I realized that there was a way to bring our musings to a finite piece of work, which we did.
Now, this was the last episode of the first season. Was that planned from the start that was going to be the last episode?
No, the problem is, see, that when Harv asked me to join $6 Million Man as producer, I may have told you this before, I said, Harv, that's, producing's kind of a pain in the ass. Let me just write and direct. That's what I really enjoy doing. Harv took me aside and said, listen, Kenny, let me explain how it works. In television, the producer is the guy that is most responsible for the whole project. The producer hires the writer, the producer hires the director. And at that point, I said, hold it right there, Harv, I'll take the job. Because I saw the opportunity to hire myself as a writer-director, which I endeavored to do on the $6 Million Man, but all of a sudden they asked me to spin off The Bionic Woman. So not only did I have the responsibilities as a producer on one show where, we had 22 episodes to get out, but now suddenly I had a second show that I was writing and producing simultaneously. And when you're the executive producer, the producer and writing producer on a television series, you don't have time to direct, really, because you've got scripts that are in works that you're trying to get written or rewritten. You've got other scripts that have already been filmed, which are in post-production, which you are trying to complete. Plus, you have the show that is shooting currently, where you've got to look at the dailies every day and make sure that the director is getting what you need to get so that you can finish it up. And it's very, very difficult to try to suddenly just take 3 or 4 weeks off to go and do a 1-hour episode when you're responsible for all of those other aspects. So part of the reason that the Ghosthunter was the last episode that we did that year was because that way I didn't have to worry about any more episodes that had to be written or produced immediately thereafter. And that's the reason it ended up last. When I did the Doomsday 2-hour, this was a script that had been written, as I recall, earlier on, and I was just waiting for a time when I could take enough time away from the producing aspects of my job to really get on the set. And ultimately, that only happened because I let go of the $6 Million Man. I said, look, I just can't do both shows and still have the time to direct, which is what I really was first and foremost always, was a director, and what I enjoy the most. So I was eager to get to it, and that's how we had to do it.
Let me ask you now, because one of the things I find fascinating about the first season of Bionic Woman is that in some respects, or who knows, maybe in many respects, there are similarities with it and the first season of 6 Mil. And I'm just curious, because one thing that might tie this all together, how long was it from when you got the word that you were going to spin off Bionic Woman to actually going before the cameras, was it?
Let's see, what time is it now? It was moments, because when I had originally created the Bionic Woman, as you know, they wanted her to be dead at the end of the 2-hour two-parter that we did. And I kept saying, no, this is a bad idea. Let me just put her in the deep freeze. And Universal and Freddie Silverman running ABC said, no, we want to do love story, where she dies at the end and our hero is heartbroken. And besides, we don't want a lot of bionic people running around. There was such a furor when the two-part aired, and she did die, as I kept saying she shouldn't. And we got so much response from the public, lots and lots of letters just poured in saying, how dare you, oh, goodness sake, bring her back. And one of my favorites came from the head of the Department of Psychology at Boston University, who said, how dare you create this brilliant female archetype, this empowerment of women role model, and just toss her away. And the network and the studio were impressed by the letters that came in, but they were way more impressed by the fact that the $6 Million Man's ratings shot up enormously, because it had just been sort of limping along until that point. And so that's when they called me and said, yeah, why'd you kill her off anyway, Kenny? That was a stupid idea. Let's bring her back to life. So I brought her back. And at the end of the summer, when we did the summer reruns of The Bionic Woman, it was the last of the reruns of 6 Mil that summer. And that at the end, we said, tune in next week for the return of The Bionic Woman. And everybody in America tuned in. It was the shot 6 Mil up into the top 10, I think even to the top 5 shows in the country at that point. And it stayed there the whole time that I was producing on the show. And so immediately Freddie called me and said, look, we really ought to spin off The Bionic Woman into a separate series. And that was it had to be September, October maybe of 1976. And we, I said, well, okay. And I jumped on it. I brought Jim Perriott on with me as as producer writer, who's a brilliantly talented young guy who has become a really mainstay of television, having most recently helped to get on the air shows like Grey's Anatomy and Ugly Betty and Nashville and many others. Jim and I just jumped in and started writing. We were on the air. I think we had to be on the air by January or something like that. It was a mid-season replacement. So there was not much time at all. We really were, jumping in and flying by the seat of our pants and shooting and writing as fast as we could. And then after only a couple of weeks, Lindsay was in a really bad automobile accident with her then husband, Michael Brandon, and was injured and was not going to be able to work. And suddenly, the brand new show was hamstrung by her being offline for a couple of weeks. A couple of weeks was a huge amount of time when you're doing episodic television, because you're always scrambling to get them made. And so it was a very, very quick turnaround, and we had to get on the air and stay on the air. And there were some times when Jim and I were working on script possibilities where we just had to have a script to start prepping immediately, or we were going to be off the air. And there were a couple of times where Jim and I sat down and worked out a story in the morning, and we split up the script, and he would take the first 2 acts and I would take the last 2 acts, and by the end of the day we'd have a completed screenplay written. It was a real rush constantly to get the show on the air. And also just tangentially to that, because when you were doing a 1-hour episodic show, you were supposed to shoot it in 6 days. Well, I knew that wasn't going to happen. And although every episodic television show till The Bionic Woman came along had been a 6-day show, I went to Frank Price when we got the order for the series, and I said, Frank, it's a 7-day show. Lindsay can't handle 6 days. She doesn't have the stamina to do that unless you let me create other characters to surround her, and so she can have days off. And the network said, no way. We want her in everything. We want her all the time, that face on the screen. And so it became a 7-day show, the first ever, and then so slowly the rest of the industry sort of followed suit. But the idea is that when you shoot a show in 7 days, you're then supposed to have about 6 weeks to turn it around and get the post-production done, the editing, the dubbing, the music, and all of that. And that time kept getting shorter and shorter, to the point that there were a couple of episodes of Bionic Woman where we finished shooting on a Thursday, and the following Wednesday they were on the air. So not only did we not have 6 weeks, we didn't even have 7 days, so it was crazy.
See, that's interesting, because you say how quickly the turnover was there. And I'm thinking back to, the stories I hear about Harv saying they had 6 weeks to get 6 mil as a proper series on the air as well. And for that matter, when you look at both first seasons, it really is a variety of what the show has to offer, whether it's one moment Steve's visiting his mom, to the next he's fighting a robot, or Jamie is with her kids and she's involved with the local school bus driver, or she's off in the Middle East racing. There really was a variety showing the potential of what the series had to do.
Well, that was it. We really had an anthological base. I wanted to make Jamie a school teacher so that there was a really direct relationship and involvement with kids. I wanted to make the show much more personal and less mission-oriented than the 6 Mil had been. And certainly I wanted to add a lot of humor to it that I felt had been missing in 6 Mil until I got there. I never saw many of the original 6 Mil episodes at all. I didn't have time. I jumped in and ran. I looked at a few to get an idea of the types of things they were doing. But by the time we'd gotten to The Bionic Woman, my feet were a little more firmly on the ground, and I knew the kind of opportunities that we would have to get Jamie into various venues. The idea of making her a nun or a lady wrestler or a cop were in some ways obvious, in other ways sort of fun. And that's what we were looking to do, was to try to find stories that would allow us to bring her humanity into a situation where her character could really shine the most, and we could exhibit all the various aspects and opportunities that were presented by the character that I'd created.
Let's turn to the episode itself, Ghosthunter. And in the commentary, you're talking about the cold opens. And this is something actually I've always been curious about, because Bionic Woman was pretty much consistent, but 6 Mil was sort of scattered. Sometimes there was a cold open, sometimes they went to credits. What dictated the cold open? Because even sometimes some of those first acts just seemed like extended cold opens.
Yeah, well, I think that what you're always looking to do, particularly in episodic television, is grab the audience right at the beginning so that they don't have time to say, well, let's see what's on the other shows that's opposite us, you know. And a cold opening was a way to reach out and grab the audience by the throat right away and say, wait, you don't want to turn this off. You got to see what's going on here. And in order to do that, you've got to stay with the show, stay tuned in. To me, they were a great opportunity to sort of do a teaser that drew an audience in right away, that set up a mystery or a circumstance or a question that the audience wanted to have answered. And that was the value of I think, a cold opening. And I think that generally they really helped the show move along. Once a show becomes more successful, then the audience is going to have a little more patience with you. But when you're first starting out with a brand new series on the air, I think you want to grab them as quickly as you can and not make them sit through a bunch of credits in perhaps a slower moving opening. This way you get them, and then you can, after the main title, come back and sort of take a breath and say, okay, now we're going to slide you into what the show is all about. At least you've got them in the seats at that point.
That was always something that saddened me a little bit when I realized, because I had seen the show in its original run, then I saw the syndication run of it, and I didn't make the connection at the time, because what they did was, the way it was syndicated to a lot of the markets was, you would actually get the Bionic Woman theme opening, and then they would do the cold open, and then they would cut to Act 1. And it was so you were actually, a good 4 or 5 minutes into the episode before you'd actually see what episode title it was.
How weird. Yeah, well, once things go into syndication and they get out of the creator's hands, you can never be sure quite how it's going to end up. Certainly the way that we originally presented them was the way that we felt dramatically they were going to be the most presentable and the most successful, and I think we were right for the most part. There was a time while I was doing both shows at one point where $6 Million Man was the #1 show in the country and the Bionic Woman was the #3 show in the country. And those were, sensational numbers to be having, and we had a lot of fun doing them too.
Now, the bridge. You have the bridge scene there with the collapsible bridge from the tour, the Universal tours there, and we'll also see it at least one episode of $6 Million Man. There are 2 scenes with the bridge, and I would imagine they were both shot at the same time in the same day.
Yeah, you got one night and you're out there and you got to get everything you need for the night. And, and obviously you start with your leading lady, and we shot all the stuff with Lindsay first and then said, okay, honey, go home and get some rest and we'll shoot the rest of the stuff that we need where you are not involved and where we can just use Rita Eggleston, her brilliant stunt double, and, and my leading lady could get some rest. But I had fallen into using aspects of the Universal tour when I created the Secret of Bigfoot episode for the $6 Million Man, and I wrote the scene where the creature, Bigfoot, was carrying Lee through this, or Lee discovered this revolving ice tunnel in the side of a cliff. And I remember my production manager, Teddy Shills, just went berserk. He said, what are you, crazy? This is not feature stuff. This is episodic television. I took him on the back lot and said, Teddy, let me show you something. And so at that point, I began looking around for other things I could use. I never could figure out a way to use the Jaws Lake in the series. Although my wife Susie and I were driving around the back lot one day, and we passed the lake, and the shark was up out of the water. They were doing maintenance on him, and this guy was leaning into the shark's mouth so that all you could see was his butt, and the rest of him was being swallowed by the shark. It was a pretty funny sight. The problem with doing episodic television is you have no money. The shows cost about $400,000, maybe $450,000 an episode, which sounds like a lot of money until you realize that you've got a whole union crew that you've got to pay, and you got to buy their lunch as well. By the time you've given the money to your leading ladies and the actors, and there's not much money left to make the movie with. So we were always, Jim Perriott and I spent many an evening walking around the back lot of Universal and snooping through the sound stages to see what sets had been built recently by some feature that we could steal and repaint or something and use for our shows. And in the course of that, I knew the collapsing bridge was out there, and And when we came to doing the Ghosthunter, it was an obvious choice to say, okay, well, we can add some more stuff to this. Chuck Davis, my brilliant production designer, came up with some ways to really make it look like the thing was actually falling apart with, boards dropping and stuff, in addition to the mechanics of the bridge itself, which would, of course, collapse and then uncollapse every 10, 15 minutes for the trams to go over on the tour. But it was, it was a great piece of production value that we never could have afforded to build, or even cheat or dummy up. And this was way before the world of CGI, and we didn't have that kind of visual effects in those days. So it was just a question of necessity being the mother of invention, John, and looking for things that we could use. I mean, in a lot of the BIONIC episodes, and particularly later in the Incredible Hulk episodes, I raided the film library of Universal Pictures to see what we could steal, and wasn't really stealing. Universal owned it all. We wanted to do the Lumberjack episode of $6 Million Man, and I couldn't afford to get the kind of footage that I needed in a real lumber operation, a forest, and all of that. But they had done a movie called Sometimes a Great Notion, which had all this tremendous footage. It was a movie with Richard Jekyll and Paul Newman, and Universal said, hey, as long as you don't use anybody's face, you're welcome to whatever the footage you want, So we would constantly be looking there, when we were trying to make the show look like it cost more than the meager money that we had to work with.
Okay, so I got to ask this one question then, because this was, I thought, was odd, and you bring it up in the commentary. You talk about it. There's a scene with Richard Anderson as Oscar Goldman where he's talking to Jamie, and you talked about how you made up this small little computer lab, and Oscar's sitting there, and he's talking, and I love the whole thing about the tracking shot because it was a long dialogue. But if you were doing all this, and obviously you were to save money, why didn't you shoot that in Oscar's office?
It probably had to do with the fact that we were filming on a location somewhere else that wasn't at the studio, and we needed to fill out the day because you have normally a 13 or 12 or 13 hour day if you're shooting on the lot, and you try to stay on the lot for that whole day so that you're not moving the company. Whenever you move the company from a local location back onto the lot, you're losing 2 hours of filming time. Because they don't say, okay, well, we'll give you 2 extra hours. Sorry. You've got to still make it all fit in the time that you've got. So when we're putting together the production board of how we're going to shoot a day, and we realize we need this scene with Oscar, but we're nowhere near the studio. We've got to find someplace else to do it and create a different location for him to be in. That's why these scenes would get pulled out of his standing set, because we need to we had enough work for, let's say, 10 hours of the day, but we had nothing to do for the last 2 hours, and yet we needed this scene with Oscar. We didn't want to take 2 hours moving back to the studio because that was a waste of time. Well, let's find a place here where we can shoot something else. And it's not only TV, episodic TV that does this. Any good feature will do the same thing. Once you've settled the filming company in a location, whether it's on a lot or on a location, you want to stay there for the day if you possibly can, because nobody wants to waste all the time you have to waste when you pack the trucks up and drive them somewhere else and then unpack them. You lose your directing time.
I've got to ask this question because, well, you're aware of Betsy Dodd, the Bionic Blonde, and her website. And, in talking to her on different podcasts and reading her blog and such, I've become more aware of the clothing that people wore, not just the particularly louder, more garish looking outfits and stuff, but just the clothing in general. And one thing that stood out to me, there was a scene with Christy McNichol where she's talking to Lindsay and she's wearing this little happy face. And I had to wonder, was that a costuming choice, or was that something like Christy just wore to the set that day and you thought, hey, considering we're dealing with, such supernatural elements and she's a little odd and such, put the happy face there and all?
Well, yeah, I think it was certainly not just something Christy happened to wear to the set that day. I mean, anything that is seen on the screen has been passed muster by not only the costume designer and the wardrober, but the producer and the director as well. Because, if it was something that was going to enhance or give us a sense of her character a little bit, then it was fine. If it was something that was going to detract or be distracting or just not appropriate for the character that she was playing, then she wouldn't have have worn it. It was very more than likely, my costume designer, who was quite a character named Chuck Waldo with a great sense of humor. He said, you're doing this. It might have been, and I don't remember exactly, it might have been that Chuck said, how about we put a little happy face on her, because that makes her all the more cheery and takes away from the fact that she is, in fact, the heavy in the piece, albeit unknowingly. So it may just have been, a little touch of humor that somebody suggested, most likely Chuck Waldo. And I said, yeah, that's a funny idea. Or Christy might have suggested it to me, too. I don't recall how it got there, but it was certainly not accidental.
Okay, I've got to say, I loved in the commentary your comment about Lindsay and how she could make it sound like, as she spoke, she sounded like she was making it up sort of as she was going along. It wasn't like it was all staged. And it was something I've always noticed about her. And in fact, I had mentioned I was going to ask her if I ever got the chance, how do you do that? How do you come across sounding so natural? And my friends were all like, don't ask her that question. That's dumb. She'll just say it's acting and such. But to me, if it is acting, it's the most natural acting I've ever seen, because she really just comes across like a person and not someone playing a character.
No, that's very true. I have often said that one of Lindsay's greatest talents is her spontaneity, her ability to sound totally spontaneous. And I think it was one of the things that drew me particularly, and also Harv Bennett, to casting her, because we had seen a lot of film of a lot of lovely actresses who were really good and did wonderful jobs. But I think it might have been the pilot for my friend Steve Cannell's Rockford Files was one of the films that we saw in which we were looking at Lindsay's performance. And I noticed it there, and I began to look at some more stuff that she had done. She was a contract player at Universal. They had her under contract. And so she did a lot of the Universal shows. And I looked at a clip from an Adam 12 episode that she had done where she just played a small guest role in it. But it was the same thing. She just popped off the screen at you as a real human being, because she'd get into those broken moments where she'd be stuttering, trying to, and sometimes it was literally a stuttering, and that kind of thing, which had a reality about it, because oftentimes, what directors and producers want is, no, just read the words that are written. Don't try to elaborate on it. Don't try to make it more than it is, but I loved the fact that she brought her own stuff to it and her own sense of how people really talk. That was one of the things that intrigued me about her, and I thought that it brought a real reality, the real sense of a real human being who was not acting, but was just there and talking the way we all talk. Like I just said, the way twice, and also particularly in the first season when we were first working together, and even on the episode, the original two-parter, which I did not direct, wish I had. Lindsay and I spent a lot of time together just talking, and in listening to her. And listening to Lindsay's speech patterns, when it came to doing the series, I really had Lindsay's voice in my head, so that I was able to really write the lines which went right into her way of speaking, and which I knew she wouldn't have any trouble with. We used to sit in her trailer, Lindsay and I, and read every upcoming episode together. We'd read the script together. She'd play Jamie, and I'd play all the other characters. And at one point, she suggested that we really ought to try to do a show that way, where I really did play all of the other characters. And I said, I don't know if the studio is going to go for that, but we didn't do that. But she appreciated what I was trying to do, and she carried it off beautifully. But yeah, that spontaneity is one of her true gifts.
Now, you come to the end of the first season. You've got Ghosthunter there. You've got the other episodes you've done. What lessons did you take away from your first season as producer of this show that informed the second season?
Well, I think, I've always said that my days at Universal doing the BIONIC shows were rather like graduate school with pay. And it's really true, because I had a fair amount of success in New York as a live television and live tape director, and on a lot of different shows and things. I had been the executive producer of the Mike Douglas Show, which was the first and probably still largest talk show in American television history. We had a much bigger audience than Oprah ever had, for example. I was like 90 million people were watching the Mike Douglas show every week. It was huge. And so I'd had a fair amount of success doing that, and I'd done a lot of documentary film work and a little bit of narrative film, but not really dramatic narrative film like I did once I landed at Universal. So it was a very steep learning curve, and at the same time I had sort of chops, as we call it, the skills as a producer. And I discovered, courtesy of my friend Stephen Bochco, who convinced me to start trying to write, which I had never done until I came to California, that I could write, and I could write pretty fast and with a sort of a good sense of character because of the training that I'd had at Carnegie Mellon University. It was then Carnegie Tech when Steve Bochco and I were students and classmates at Carnegie. And it was a theater school. There was no film and there was no television. It was only theater, learning to work with actors on the boards. And I took the same writing classes that Bochco did, and as well as all the directing classes and such that I took, and as well as all the acting classes. I had to do the same acting classes that all the actors did. So I learned Stanislavski and creating characters and building the character and all of that, so that I knew how to, and the idea is at Carnegie that you learn how to talk to actors, which was, I think, one of the assets that I had as a director when I first came out here, because a lot of film directors, and particularly television directors, don't take time to talk to the actors. They just figure the actors are going to do what they're going to do, and the director has to get the camera in the right place and get the film in the can. So the idea of actually having my feet on the ground, doing all of the jobs for the first time on the BIONIC shows, really just gave me more of a sense of what I could accomplish and the ways that I had to go about accomplishing it in order to make the pictures look like they cost more than they actually did, which was always our challenge, to make a dime look like a dollar whenever we possibly could. And at the same time, to enhance and to entertain an audience. And going back to the Mike Douglas show for a minute, we did 90 minutes a day, 6 times a week in front of a live audience of about 300 people. And I got so when I was at the Douglas show that I didn't have to look at the audience to see how they were responding to a particular segment that we were doing. I could just feel the audience on my back. And that theatrical experience, that is, of being in a theater with a group of people, was a tremendous asset to me as a producer and as a director in filmmaking, because in filmmaking you don't have that audience there unless they're in your head somewhere. And that was a great asset that I had. I didn't really realize it until I was in the middle of doing The Bionic Woman, and just knowing something was the right way to go, the right way to shoot a scene, the right way to get a point made across. And I stepped back at one point and said, how is it that I know that? How is it that I have that instinct? And I realized that a lot of it came from working for 2.5 years, at the Mike Douglas show with an audience, doing, 700 or 800 hours of television, live TV. By the time I had gotten well into the second season of The Bionic Woman, I really had a level of confidence that because the show was successful, because it was going well, and thanks to my pals Steve Bochco and Steve Cannell, who was also a great helpmate, and the late Harv Bennett as well, they gave me an opportunity to sort of blossom, and I was lucky enough that that they watered me, I guess.
When you come to the end of your commentary, as with all the ones I've heard to this point, you always are very open in saying to people, if you've got any other questions, if there's anything you want to know about, you can easily get in touch with me, which I don't ever see anybody else offering to do. Can you tell people here how, if they want to get in touch with you, they can do that, and where they can find more about you on the web?
Sure, yeah. If you just Google Kenneth Johnson, you'll get the link to my official website, which is just very simply www.kennethjohnson.us. And on that website, you'll find links to all of the shows that I have done, and a lot of photos and a lot of video stuff and interviews and clips and things like that. And also there is a link just to email me. And it will send you directly to my email address that I keep for my friends. And it's funny. When the first commentary that I did was on the DVD of V, when we did the DVD of my original 4-hour V miniseries, and I put that on there as just sort of a throwaway thing, and it became Beware What You Wish For, but it's interesting because thousands and thousands thousands and thousands of people from all over the world have written to me about all of my shows. Of all of them, interestingly enough, V gets the most press and the most inquiries. And I write back to everyone because it's, somebody's going to take the time to write me. I feel like they should, get a response. And I try to be as forthcoming, as I can. But the great thing about it is that it's an extension, I've realized. All of those people writing is an extension of those audiences that I was in front of while I was doing the Mike Douglas show and other live theatrical things that I have done. Because by having this now wonderful interaction with the audience itself, albeit that they're coming in by email as opposed to hearing their applause, in person, I still get a very good sense of what they want, what they liked, what they weren't so sure about. And it's given me an ongoing sort of connection to the live audience that I think has affected and only enhanced the work that I've been able to do over the years. So I'm incredibly grateful to the people who do take the time to drop me a note, and I will always respond.
Well, Kenny Johnson, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. What are you up to these days in terms of production?
Well, I discovered a couple of years ago that, speaking of V, that I was under contract to Warner's Television when I wrote V for my friend Brandon Tartikoff at NBC. But I discovered just a couple of years ago that I, in fact, own and control the motion picture rights to my original 4-hour miniseries. I own the rights to any theatrical remakes or sequel movies that are based upon my original. And suddenly I had a lot of new best friends. And virtually all of the studios came after me, very eager to buy the rights for an extraordinary amounts of money. And I just was wary of losing creative control if I sold the rights to the studios. And so we have been endeavoring to, so I said no. And the funny thing about in Hollywood, John, when you say no, they say, okay, we understand. How much money do you really want? And I said, no, it's not about money, guys. It's about protecting the quality of a project that is very important to me. I've seen what's happened when other people have taken on projects that I had created, like the television series of The Incredible Hulk, which became 2 really terrible movies that were disastrous for Universal. The Bionic Woman, which was remade in 2008, which was tracking ahead of time to be the highest-rated new series in the history of Western civilization. One of the presidents of Warner's TV was just ranting to me about how it was just going to knock everybody's socks off. I said, "Have you seen the pilot?" And they said, no, but it doesn't matter. The numbers I said, the numbers aren't going to matter. As soon as the audience tunes in, they're going to tune out.
Yeah.
And he said, no, you're so wrong. It's, and they spent $11 million advertising it all over the world. And then the Bionic Woman, they left the V off. Mm-hmm. Bionic Woman went on the air in 2008. And the initial night was great. They got 15 or 16 million people tuning in, which was a big number nowadays. But the second week, oops.
Yeah.
33% of the audience went away. The third week, another third of the audience went away. And after 8 weeks, it was gone. And just as I had predicted, because it didn't have any humanity, any humor, any heart, certainly didn't have an actress the quality and the caliber of Lindsay Wagner in the role, and so it tanked. And I got to say, it was created and produced by David Icke, whom I'd never met personally, but whom I respect greatly. And I thought when I heard he was doing it that he might pull it off because he's a talented guy. But he really gets the top grade in my book because when the show did just bomb, he was the first one to stand up and say, you know what, we blew it. We never knew what the show was about. It didn't have any heart, any humanity, any humor, and I thought, wow, that's a stand-up guy that can take it on the chin and say that they blew it. And because they did. It did not carry the kind of humanity and feeling that the original Bionic Woman gave you. I mean, certainly they could not have put my original Bionic Woman back on the air just the way it was in those days, back in the 70s. But the direction that they chose to go was just not one that audiences could embrace. So it's a challenging thing to try to take on that. And I didn't want anybody, I decided ultimately that I would rather V never got made as a big movie rather than have it get made wrong by the wrong people. So what we were endeavoring to do is, so I said no to the studios, thanks, but no thanks on the money. And we are endeavoring to set it up as an independent picture. It's expensive. It's about a $50 million movie. And we're trying to do it through private equity financing. And hey, listen, if anybody's listening to you that has contacts to the kind of money that we're looking for as equity partners, you know how to find me at my email address. And we have several folks that are doing it, and we're in discussions now with several financiers. And we've talked to, the thing about independent movies is you have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find your prince. And we've been down the road with a number of people where it looked like the money was a lock and we were going to have it in the bank the next day and all of that. And then somehow when they went to write the check, there was no ink in the pen, Yeah. But we're still on the case, and we're determined to get the movie made because it's a tremendous property that people remember very fondly. And of all of the emails that I get from people all over the world for Bionic Woman, $6 Million Man, Alien Nation, Short Circuit 2, many of the other things that I've done, I get an amount equal, far surpassing all of those comes in just for V alone. Wow. So we know that there's an audience out there, and we're just eager to get the movie made the way we want to make it.
Well, I hope it happens because, I agree with you. I mean, between the V TV series remake that they did and the Bionic Woman bringing that back, there was one, I know David Icke owned up to it and all, but I remember in the early days of the promotion for the show when he came out with the statement, we're going to show what it's like for a woman who's been invaded and how she copes with, and I thought to myself, Kenny and Lindsay did a great job with that back in the 70s. What can you do? And it was just, there was no heart to it.
No, it was very dark and very very grim and full of blood and death and people shaking their heads in slow motion in the rain, But it's you just can't make a series that connects with people that way. It didn't work. But yes, John, by all means, listen. We have several finders that are working for us, trying to put the money together, and they get a 5% fee of whatever money they bring in. So if you've got some friends that can bring it in, then you get to be executive producer on the movie with us and a 5% finder's fee. So I'll be standing by for your call.
There you go. Kenny Johnson, thank you so much for agreeing to be here on this episode of the OSI Files.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, John.
That's going to do it for this episode of the OSI Files. Before I go, I just want to say thanks once again to my guests, Herbie J. Pilato, Joel Eisenberg, and Kenny Johnson. I also want to thank Garen Barry for providing the voice of the Alex 7000 master computer, Wiggly Check for his use of the Ballad of the $6 Million Man for the opening, bumpers, and closing of the show, and Todd Wiedemann and his daughter Sarah. Todd is the webmaster of the quickly developing theosifiles.com, and Sarah creates the banners you see gracing the Facebook page. Next month, we're coming to the end of the year, and one of the things that we remember as kids was asking for that $6 Million Man or Bionic Woman action figure for Christmas. There's a great deal of new merchandise available for fans of the $6 Million Man. They need to work on the Bionic Woman, though. We need more merchandise there. But there are still plenty of fans who would love to have an action figure or something from the original toy line of both series. We're going to be looking at Day of the Robot, which inspired the Maskatron figure. I'll have two new guests joining me to discuss this episode, Billy Flynn of GeekRadioDaily.com and Alex Green of the $6 Million blog. I'll also be joined by David Lawson of the Bionic Toy Action page on Facebook. David and I will discuss the original merchandise, and he'll give us some tips on what to look for as we scour eBay for that special gift for that Bionic fan in our life, or for ourselves. So until next time, thanks for listening. Take care, everyone.
You have been listening to the OSI Files, hosted and produced by John S. Drew. If you would like to comment on anything you have heard on this podcast, please take a moment by writing us at director@theosifiles.com, commenting on our Facebook page, Twitter @OSI_files, or by calling our toll-free number 844-OSI-FILE. That's 844-674-3453. Or visit us on the web at theosifiles.com. The OSI Files is a Lucky Shot production. I am the Alex 7000 Master Computer, and I am programmed to thank you.